which has that kind of stepped, angular contour. Look at the pine trees. Look at the, the texture strokes, not much of that. And particularly the composition, which is all crowded into the lower part, except for one distant group of distant peaks and seen in the upper part. The sky is partly darkened, showing it's evening, and the travelers are arriving by evening. Anyway, a quite lovely leaf and a genuine work by this small, lesser artist. Okay, the next. Now, here, okay, I'll put in this one in just to sort of show the later stage, and for our purpose, the end stage of this devolution of the Li Tang style. This is an album leaf by a slightly younger contemporary of the Yen brothers named Joshua Gu. Joshua Gu in the academy, active in the later 12th, early 13th century. He was the teacher of a much greater master, Liang Kai. He was his teacher as a figure painter in the academy. And this is a signed work of his, an album leaf, Palace Museum in Taipei, titled Temple by a Mountain Pass. This is in the Chinese Art Treasures exhibition. Now here, and the detail beside it. Now here you can see the elements as we've seen them in the Li Tang style, carried into the form of rather hardened school mannerisms. Here's the two kinds of pine trees, A and B, very distinct. Here are the trees growing out of mats of grass covering the top of the rocks. Here is the rock texturing done in a kind of simplified way of the version of what used to be texture strokes. Okay, and then two figures making their way into the two pilgrims with parasols, whatever, repeated. Here's that the contour of the landscape form going chunky, as if very, very simple zigzag, and heavy texture. The whole heavily textured part, super textured in the lower part, and then the rest of it very empty. Okay, so we have taken the Li Tang elements and turned them into mannerisms. The two figures are going to make their way along the path and through this kind of cave, and maybe they'll stay overnight at the temple, which is over here at the right with a flag flying, and then they'll go on the next day maybe through the gate and on and so forth. All this very conventional indeed. Okay, well, all of this, as I say, very, very, very neatly, almost over neatly, defines what I speak of as a devolution of the style, from major innovative master's works down through the derivative works of the followers. This is, to be sure, an old-fashioned kind of art history, but it hasn't entirely lost its value. How this kind of art history works was analyzed, interestingly, in a book by a Yale professor named George Kubler, titled The Shape of Time. This was a book that lots of us read and argued about and talked about, and was really, really very interesting, still worth reading. I should say immediately that doing this, fitting paintings into such a sequence, doesn't by any means exhaust their content or their interest. This isn't all we do. It's only a start. It's useful for dating them and setting up a series and sort of straightening out your work, your body of work. Okay, I'll show up a number of other album leaves by Li Tang followers just to show how this other examples of this very, very fine school. There's a lot of these from the Southern Sung period, some quite fine. Here is one, a fan painting again. I'll speak about fan paintings in a minute. Very close to the Yen So Yu painting in subject and composition. I forget who it's attributed to. It's in the Palace Museum in Taipei, with an attribution, but not one that means much, as I remember. Anyway, the path coming into the landscape, into the scene, in the lower right in this case, a man and his servant walking across the bridge, about to make their way up the path to this clearing on the top of the bluff, or the hill, whatever you call it, where you see thatched houses, the usual stuff among the pine trees, same old pine trees. And then the road goes on at the right again the next day. And down below, well, a moored boat, a few other things. But very, very much the same kind of thing. Here, next please, here is one in a Japanese collection, I forget which, anyway, private collection I think, which is actually signed by an artist named Wu Shuming, except that Wu Shuming is not recorded, so we have no idea who he was. But it's a signed work, and it's interesting as a Li Tong schoolwork, obviously of the same period, roughly. In this case, two figures, pilgrims of some kind, walking with staffs, come in the path from the lower right. One of them is pointing ahead, saying, "Look, we're almost there." They are about to arrive at a temple built on the mountainside, and they presumably there will stay overnight there or rest, whatever, and then make their way. Here, the continuing road, which is always there, is way in the upper right here, very strangely moving up and then going through a pass. And the usual needle peaks and the usual pine trees and all the rest of it. Quite fine, anyway. Next, please. Oh, here's a very fine leaf, quite different. This is not so conventional. This is a rather more original painting. Album leaf in the Nelson Gallery in Kansas City. I remember when they bought it, I was quite envious. I was looking for things for the Freer Gallery, and they found this really fine Li Tong style Southern Sun leaf and bought it. Here, in the lower left, we see a farmer making his way over the bridge, making his way into the picture. But the main part of the picture features a waterside pavilion under the pine trees with a scholar gentleman in it, Gauscher, lofty gentleman, whatever. Here's a detail of it, gazing at the waterfall. Well, I'll stop sometime and talk about the implications of gazing at a waterfall and just what this means and how it turns out to have a quite scientific basis, actually. I'll do that later. At any rate, here the cliff is dramatic, light and shadow, some light and maybe a bit of gold along near the waterfall here. The water colored, and anyway, a really fine dramatic leaf in the Li Tong manner. The next, please. Here's a fan-shaped album leaf, unsigned but attributed to Li Tong, in the Liaoning Museum. It appears to belong here among the works by followers of Li Tong. The style is in some features closer to that of the great later master of the Academy, Ma Yuan. The broader brushwork on the main rocky mass, the way the distant hills are painted, the early evening sky, the extreme compression of the materials into the lower corner. Next, please. Li Tong's distinctive method of treating large rocks with sunlit and shaded sides to bring out volume is kept here, but the old axe-cut texture strokes have given way to a looser application of strokes and washes with a greater air of spontaneity. Next, please. The huge rocky mass, eroded away below by the action of the water, so that it's left jutting out dramatically, may remind us of the boulders, although they're shaped differently, in the landscape of the rainstorm attributed to Ma Yuan in the Seikado in Japan, which we will see and consider at length in the forthcoming lecture on Ma Yuan, which will be a lecture 11A. The old feature of showing two kinds of coniferous trees, one with foliage done in horizontal or diagonal strokes, and the other with rounded bunches of needles, is retained here from the Li Tong manner, but with the addition of broader brushwork, the further branches in upper right, the hanging foliage below. Next, please. A pathway comes down from the upper left, where further trees and pointed peaks make up the far distance. It bends leftward to disappear behind the huge rock, and to reappear briefly just to the lower right of it, providing access to the shore of the river or lake. Next, please. Yes. Moving rightward, we see the Ma Yuan-like row of distant hills and the solitary angler in his boat. He is nicely located a short distance from the shore, where the water is deep enough for fishing. Next, please. A